It's less frequency than you would have if you just put them all on Broadway or 15. Now, I understand you have topography, you have all kinds of other reasons to hesitate, but the geometry is very simple. The law of connections. I don't want to transfer. I like my direct bus train. I bought my house where it is because I would never have to transfer. People, and the other thing, of course, is many cultural claims are simply a projection of people's own desires onto the culture. Right? So if you don't like to transfer, you'll tend to say people hate to transfer because you want people to be like you. This is probably one of the hardest issues in transit planning, mostly because it doesn't get a lot of attention. It's not very sexy. It's not directly connected to any of these technology issues. But the fact is that if you oppose transferring, if you think people should have direct service from their origin to their destination, you are also an opponent of frequency and network simplicity, whether you like it or not. I'll take you through this. If you try to eliminate connections by providing a lot of through services to various places people are going, it has the effect of making your network less frequent and more complex. So it's a choice, a hard choice. Do you want low frequency and high complexity, but no need to transfer? Sydney, Australia does. The city I live in right now is not something I would hold up anywhere in the world as an example of a good transit system. In fact, it has one of the most poorly designed bus systems I've ever seen. Here's a quick comparison. This is a piece of slide that I mostly take around Australia to try to show people that there are other ways of designing your bus system. This is a 5 by 5 kilometer slice of Sydney on the left and Portland on the right. And it's really interesting that that same amount of space, there are perhaps 20 bus routes on that whole map of Portland in that slice, and it's a pretty inner slice. And there are probably well over 100 in the same slice of Sydney. Well, that's because Sydney has lots of routes overlapping each other on every street. Because it's not enough to have a route from A to B and from C to D and from E to F. You have to have routes for every permutation because nobody can transfer, right? So you end up with a huge, dizzying number of overlapping route numbers. Many, many routes on each street. Somebody who, and this is of course one of the great paradoxes of transit mapping, that unless you make the frequencies of service visible in your mapping, it's going to look like there's a lot more service in Sydney, which there isn't. Please remember, if any transit agency ever brags to you about how many routes there are, the number of routes that you operate is not a measure of the quality, it's not a measure of the quantity, it's a measure of the complexity. That's what you're bragging about when you say that you run 438 routes in Sydney, which is what Sydney buses will actually say. So yes, in Sydney they try to run direct CBD service from practically every bus stop in the city. And there are some very amusing photographs of what this looks like on the CBD when all those buses get there. They have the most ridiculous bus congestion you could imagine. If you've ever heard of Circular Quay, which is supposed to be one of the great exciting tourist districts of Sydney, I can assure you that for the first 400 meters in any direction from Circular Quay, all of the available street frontage is taken up with buses landing. Because they have this attitude that every bus in the entire city should go to Circular Quay. So they all get there, and then they all sit around and everybody complains about it. The Sydney network is obviously too complicated for someone to remember it all. But the Portland network is simple to remember. I actually am a geography nerd. I'm a geography nerd rather than a technology nerd. I memorize geography really fast, and I do it for pleasure. But Sydney is just exhausting, even for me. It's just exhausting. Whereas Portland, I've had that map in my head for 20 years. I could draw that map from scratch. It's really just the geography of the city. And notice the beauty of being able to say, oh, to get from here to here, you just take Hawthorne out to 39, and you go up 39. Those are the driving directions, and they're also the transit directions. Because the transit line is just the street. There's the Hawthorne transit line, and there's the 39th Avenue transit line. And when you can get that kind of simplicity, you've got an incredible kind of legibility, and an incredible ease of knowing that the system is in your head. Why is this important? This is important because great transit systems are not just for commuting. They're not just for making the trip you usually make. Great transit systems in really great cities are things that you rely on all day, things that you rely on to go various places, and therefore you need to be able to have a basic sense of the system in your head, at least for the many places that you want to go. It's impossible in Sydney. It's just impossible. Oh, here's a fun example out of California of how a fear of transferring can really do you in. In the discussions about how we were going to get rail transit to Monterey, which is down south of the Bay Area, or how we were going to get basic intercity trains to Monterey, The easiest thing to have done would have been to extend the Capital Corridor, which is a series of Amtrak trains that come down from Sacramento through Oakland to San Jose. There's about 10 of them a day, I think, and they're gradually getting more frequent. And just extend some of those to Monterey, because they're already there. But in Monterey County, of course, somebody said, wait a minute, we're important. We need to have direct trains to San Francisco. San Francisco is the real destination. And in so doing, they probably put back by a number of years the possibility of getting any trains to Monterey. Because as soon as you insisted that direct trains have to go from Monterey to San Francisco, you are now mucking up, you are now getting into a very complicated situation that involves Caltrain, the commuter rail system, and the future high-speed rail corridor, which are both trying to fit down the same four-track segment. And as a result, I think Monterey has moved beyond this now, but it's a nice example of how a perfectly well-meaning local official could completely shoot a project in the foot by insisting on not having to transfer, making his project exponentially more complicated than it needed to be. The law of density and demand. This is very interesting in Seattle in particular, especially for those of you who know what the numbers 40, 40, 20 This is an interesting formula. Every transit agency has to come up with a way to decide how much service to run in different parts of the area. And it so happens that if what you were trying to do is maximize your ridership, if what you want to do is get the most possible people onto transit and thus out of other modes, what you would want to do is match the curve by which density development relates to transit. A way to think about the y-axis here is that the ridership you would get at a constant level of service. If you're on a constant level of service over all these different places, what ridership you would get. So the x-axis is density of development. So you see wilderness near zero, farmland, an archetypal neighborhood that I call Sparsville, which is single-family homes, an archetypal neighborhood that I call Denseville, which is twice as dense as Sparsville, and then beyond that you've got Manhattan and Tokyo. It turns out that the relationship between density and demand is an upward curve through most of the densities that we live in North America or in Australia. What that means is that if this place is twice as dense as that place, and you can understand intellectually why this would be the case. If this place is twice as dense as that case, and then we have a bus stop with the same sort of radius in either place, well, there are twice as many people within fixed distance of the bus stop here, so that's twice as many already. But in addition, then, you have the difference of density generating other differences in the economics of driving. It's easier to find parking in Sparsville than it is in Denseville. And you're more likely to be able to walk to a corner shop in Denseville than you are in Sparsville. As you put in the inevitable consequences of those things, that takes you then to something more than twice, to something that's more like a parabola. Now, I have yet to encounter a transit agency that actually deploys service along this curve. In fact, most transit agencies are deploying service on an almost opposite curve. Like 20, 40, 40. Interesting. What's that accomplishing? Is that does that make sense? I've worked with a number of transit agencies on this sort of issue, and what I try to get them to do is I'm not telling them that one way to do this is right or wrong. You wouldn't design your transit system to that curve and expect to survive politically. In King County, I would guess that if you design your transit system according to that curve, you would have some peak bus, probably an all-day bus to Bellevue, and maybe some peak buses out to Overlake, but no local bus service at all on the east side of South King County. It all performs well below what you get on local bus service in Seattle, so you just not do it. Again, the funny thing about this, though, is that on the one hand, it appears to be incredibly biased toward those granola-eating leftists in the city. And yet, on the other hand, it is, of course, the fiscal conservative thing to do. If you want to run a transit business, this is exactly what you would do. So and one of the nice things about this particular way of thinking about it is that it tends to break the liberal-conservative divide.